Chapter 6. Rebekah put a little bit of mousse in her hair, then used her blow dryer until her hair made the little wispy feathers she liked when she didn't have to pull it back. She'd preheated her oven so it would be ready when Jeremy showed up, and thanks to the grocery shopping she'd just done, she had lettuce and tomatoes to make a salad. She rinsed the lettuce in the colander and had just chopped the tomatoes when she heard a knock at her door. "I'm sorry I'm late." Traffic was moving like a turtle. Some guy's alternator went out on Main Street, Jeremy said when she let him in. "That's okay. Gave me a chance to start a salad." She took the pizza box from him, opened it, and put the pizza on a cookie sheet. While it baked, she finished making the salad. Her hands were busy doing one thing, but her brain was churning on another. Now that she'd told Dr. Hunsaker her secret and hadn't lost her job, it should be safe to tell Jeremy, right? And she should definitely do it before their relationship went even farther so he'd have a chance to back out. They were meshing together well, much better than she'd thought they would, and she could see this going somewhere. It wasn't fair to let this continue without telling him the truth, even if the thought did make her a little nauseated. He leaned on the counter and watched her. "Is there anything I can do to help? I can wash something, maybe?" "No, it's about done, but thanks." "What movie did you bring?" He held up a video. "Star Wars." "Let me guess, you have a little crush on Princess Leia." "Nope. I like watching Alderaan blow up. It's pretty cool." Rebekah laughed. "Yeah, it's pretty cool, even though it's very sad. Here, set this on the table, would you?" He took the salad bowl from her. "How long until the pizza's done?" "About 20 minutes. Then do you mind if we sit down and talk?" She followed him over to the couch and sat down, studying her fingernails instead of looking him in the face. It was time to be brave and hope he didn't go running out of her apartment like it was on fire. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "You said you might be able to open up to me after you talked to your sister. Did you talk to her yet?" "Yeah, I did, and she thinks I can trust you." "She's a smart girl." "Yes, you can trust me. I've got a ton of flaws, and I'm told that I snore, and I've still got boxes in my living room, but yes, you can trust me." She smiled. "I'm not worried about your boxes." "Then what are you worried about?" "That you'll think I'm crazy." "Well, that's easily solved." "I already think you're crazy." She picked up a throw pillow and swatted his arm with it. "That's not the way to encourage someone to open up to you." Sorry. He held up his hands in self-defense. "You're not crazy. Not even a little. But you haven't heard what I need to tell you." "That's because you haven't said anything yet." He reached out and took her hand. "I'll hear you out, whatever it is." "Okay, but remember that you promised." Once she started talking, it was like a cork had been popped, and she told him everything, about her father's penchant for electronics, how a fuse had been blown or something on that crazy night, and how she'd been able to diagnose people ever since. Jeremy didn't say one word the whole time she was talking, but she could see his emotions flitting across his face. He looked shocked and surprised, but he never looked disbelieving. "Wow," he said when she was finished. That's so incredible. I told Dr. Hunsaker about it today, and he didn't fire me, so there's that." Jeremy ran his hand down his face. "I've never heard anything like this. My brain feels like it's been turned into spaghetti. I don't mean the good stuff, like your mom's, I mean the crappy canned stuff." The oven timer went off just then, and Rebekah was glad for the interruption. She lifted the pizza off the pan with a spatula, then cut it into slices. It wasn't the most extravagant meal ever, but that's not what either of them were in the mood for anyway. When she brought the pizza over to the table, Jeremy said, "Is that why you want to meet my brother? You want to see if there's anything you can do to help him?" "Yeah. I mean, I know it's a long shot, he's probably had great medical care, and I can't promise anything. But if I did see something, I can't tell you how much that would mean to me, Jeremy said. My brother and I are pretty close. But you understand that because of all your sisters. He paused. Wait. Did one of them really have a ruptured ovarian cyst? Rebekah felt heat rise in her cheeks. No. That was the lie I told to cover up my power. I'm sorry, I don't lie just for the fun of it. I understand. I'd probably do the same thing. He took a bite of pizza and swallowed it, then said, I can't believe how gutsy you've been through this whole thing. Gutsy? What do you mean? Well, you get struck by lightning. We weren't actually struck. Don't interrupt, you're messing up the drama of my story. You get struck by lightning and you don't even freak out about it, that's gutsy. Then you go around saving people's lives with your newfound powers, and you never think about making money off it, that's heroic. I'm impressed. I'm seriously impressed. Except that we weren't actually struck. He sighed. Fine. If you want to be nitpicky about the details. I'm not being nitpicky. I want to be accurate because you need to understand the full breadth and scope of what you're getting into here. You've said you want to keep seeing me, I'll understand if this changes your mind. She really hoped it didn't, but how could it not? She was kind of a freak. He took her hand and played with her fingers. This definitely doesn't change my mind. I don't think anything could, unless you told me you were a drug lord or something, and even then, it would be a tough call. You don't understand how amazing you are, Rebekah, and I felt that way before I knew about your gift. The gift is just like a layer of frosting on an already very delicious cake. She quirked an eyebrow. You're calling me a dessert? Is that what the feminist movement has given us, the right to be called dessert? He laughed and shook his head. Of course not. I'm just really bad at coming up with analogies. I told you I have my flaws. She smiled, loving the way he rose to the challenge when she baited him, and baiting him was fun. All right, I will overlook the cake comment because I'm still thinking about what you said first, about how amazing I am. Yes. Think about that and don't dwell on my poor communication skills. The fact is, I want to date you, Rebekah, and I don't want to date anyone else. Maybe ever again. This might be it for me. I might have found the one girl I want to date for the rest of my life. And maybe I'm scaring you off right now, all I know is, you haven't scared me. Not by a long shot. So, you're basically unable to be scared. Is that what you're saying? When it comes to you, yes. The only thing that scares me is not giving this a try. Then maybe we should give this a try. I wouldn't want you to be scared. He grinned. I like that idea a lot. And thank you for trusting me with your secret, I promise you, I won't tell anyone else. Thank you. That means a lot to me. She paused. So, how about some Star Wars? It's been a long time since I've seen Alderaan get blown up. Hey, Dad. Rebekah plopped down in the extra chair next to his computer. Whatcha doing? I'm trying to figure out how to program this necromancer character, Bob McClain said, pointing at his computer monitor. I came up with the concept last night, but the coding just won't do what I want it to do. My boss asked me for a new game idea, and I think this is the one, but the execution has to be just right. Your execution is always impeccable, Dad, Rebekah reassured him. You'll get this, you're brilliant. Thanks, sweetheart. You do know you're my favorite, right? Of course. She grinned. And I won't tell the other 6. Good girl. He swiveled around in his chair. So, what brings you here, to see me? You usually hang out in the kitchen with your mother when you drop by. What's she doing right now, anyway? She's been working on something in there for quite a while. Looked to me like she's trying to make tortillas. A worthwhile endeavor if there ever was one. Rebekah pulled in a breath. I need you to talk to me about boys, Dad. He raised an eyebrow. Didn't your mother have this conversation with you a long time ago? Like, when you were 12? Rebekah laughed. Yes, but that's not what I mean. I mean, how do you know when the boy who says he likes you really does like you, and that he's not just saying it? What if he only likes one thing about you, but nothing else, and he's just pretending to like all the rest because of that one thing? Bob sighed. I sure wish you girls would ever ask a question flat out, without all these hypotheticals and vagueness. It would make it easier for me to give an answer that's actually useful. I know, but sometimes we can't be more specific. Let me just put it this way, how can I know if a guy really likes me? First of all, I hope this fellow isn't just stringing you along. If he is, I'll have to go rough him up a little bit. Rebekah smiled at the thought of her mellow father roughing anyone up, but she let him continue without interrupting. And second, pay attention to how he treats you. Does he listen when you talk? Does he ask questions about your day? Does he want to be with you even if you're not making out? You, Dad. Gross. I'm glad you think making out is gross. That will save you from lots of heartache later. I actually meant that talking to my dad about making out is gross. Oh. He looked crestfallen. You know what, sometimes it's hard to believe that you girls are all grown up. I still think of you as being 9 and 10, back before things were complicated. Makes me wonder where all the time went. But think of all the time you have now. An idea tickled the back of Rebekah's mind. Why don't you and Mom take some classes together? That would be so much fun. Your mother's just started talking about learning macrame, Bob replied. Can you imagine me doing macrame? That would actually be pretty awesome, but we won't put you through it. I was thinking more like dance lessons or painting lessons. I don't know, we're too old to be learning new tricks. You're never too old, and besides, you'd be spending time together. That's the main thing. I'll think about it. In the meantime, wasn't I in the middle of giving advice to you? How'd we get so off topic? You brought up making out. Ah, that's right. A guaranteed conversation stopper. He chuckled. What I'm getting at is this, when I was dating your mother, I looked forward to spending time with her no matter what we were actually going to do. With other girlfriends, I'd get bored if we weren't doing what I wanted all the time. Are you saying you wanted to make out all the time, Dad? Bob's face went bright red. No. I mean, Barbara. I need your help. Rebekah tried not to crack up. Yes, dear? Barbara stuck her head into Bob's study, a little bit of flour on her nose. Your daughter has somehow gotten the idea that I like to make out. And? Barbara asked, mildly. Would you please set the record straight? I'm really not sure what you mean, dear. Barbara looked at Rebekah and winked. I was trying to explain to her that she'll know if a young man likes her if he enjoys spending time with her even when they're not making out, and somehow that got all twisted around. Oh, I see. Well, dear, you know that giving relationship advice is a dangerous business to be in. She turned to Rebekah. Are we talking about Jeremy? I thought we were talking about Dad, but yeah, we can change the subject if you want. Rebekah grinned. He says he's starting to feel pretty serious about me, and I was hoping for some advice. That's wonderful. Barbara beamed. I really liked him when he was here for Sunday dinner. You've been out with him before that, haven't you? We went out Saturday, yes. See, Bob? I was right. I told your father you had to know each other a little longer than you were letting on. Not a whole lot longer, though, Rebekah said. It's actually happening pretty fast. As it did for your sisters, except Jessica. She took her own sweet time, but that's just how she is. When you find the right one, it can happen instantly. You might take longer to make it official, but you have a sense right from the start. For a brief flicker of a second, Rebekah wondered if maybe her mother had some kind of gift of matchmaking, but she discarded that thought as soon as she had it. First, her mother wasn't the kind who could keep secrets, and they'd all know about a gift if she had one. Second, she hadn't tried to set up any of her daughters, and if she was a matchmaker, again, they'd all know about it. So if Jeremy did turn out to be the one, you wouldn't get freaked out that I just met him? Of course I would. That's my job. But then I'd get over it and we'd start planning a wedding. She paused. But what about medical school? Rebekah closed her eyes as she realized the implications of what her mother was asking. Jeremy had just gotten a job in Bagley, and he wouldn't want to uproot again so soon after moving here. If she got into medical school, she'd be moving to San Antonio, and he'd be in Bagley. Maybe they could find a place to live exactly in the center, and then they could both commute half an hour, but that just seemed silly. I don't know, Mom, she said at last. We don't even know that I'll get in, though, and we don't know that Jeremy and I will end up together. We can't make plans with so little information. You can't make plans, but you can certainly be thinking about all the variables, Bob said. You might have to try several different approaches until you find the right one, and you'll have to be willing to put aside your preconceived ideas and think of something new. His eyes took on a faraway look, and he spun back around to his computer. His fingers flew over the keys for a moment, and then he hit enter. There, he said, pointing to the screen. There. I did it. I knew you would, Dad, Rebekah said with a grin. That's because you're a genius. Well, you're a genius too, and you're going to make this work out. If he's the right guy, nothing will stop the two of you. Thanks, Dad. Rebekah stood up and gave each parent a quick hug. Gotta run, I'm on the night shift. Bring Jeremy over again soon, Barbara called out as Rebekah hurried toward the front door. She'd just have to do that. It sounded like fun. Chapter 7. Harriet turned from the telephone, a look of shock on her face. There's been a gas leak at the Senior Citizen Center, she announced. There was an explosion, and countless injuries. Some parts of the building have collapsed, and they're going to have to dig people out. We need to stand ready when the ambulances start rolling in. I'm going to page everyone on staff to get down here. Rebekah gave a sharp nod, already thinking about everything that needed to be done. She trotted through the emergency room, checking that every bed was ready for a new patient. There was one little girl who'd been brought in with an allergic reaction, but the medication they'd given her was taking effect, and Rebekah didn't sense any further complications. She discharged the girl so the bed would be free, and she changed out the sheets and made sure everything was ready. The first ambulance pulled up, and Jeremy and Frank guided their stretcher inside. 80-year-old man with a crush injury to his chest, Jeremy called out. Rebekah came to the man's side and touched him. What she saw made her wince. He needs chest x-rays stat, she told the orderly who had just responded to his pager. He's got at least 3 broken ribs. The orderly nodded, and Rebekah turned to the next bed. Bagley only had a few ambulances available, and soon she started to notice vehicles from surrounding counties. The whole area must have been alerted about this emergency. Thank goodness they were getting some help. St. Christian's Medical Center is sending over some personnel, Dr. Hunsaker called out as he helped bring in yet another patient. It'll take them about 20 minutes to get here, but they've promised to drive fast. He turned to Rebekah. Listen, we have a situation here. I need your abilities, but you can't be seen issuing orders around here, or people are going to get suspicious. I want you to get out there and do triage on the scene. We're going to lose lives if we don't hurry. Rebekah nodded. The senior care facility in Bagley was the largest one in 4 surrounding towns, and there were easily 100 residents there, not to mention the staff. They had to do whatever was necessary to get those people the help they needed. She grabbed a medical kit and raced to the door. "Take me with you back to the scene," she told the first ambulance driver she saw. "I'm on Dr. Hunsaker's orders." "You sure?" "It's not pretty," he told her. "I don't care." He nodded once, and she climbed up beside him. They pulled out onto the road, and he flipped the switch for the siren, making cars in front of them scatter. Under any other circumstances, it would be fun to ride in the front of an ambulance and careen around corners, but knowing what lay ahead, there was nothing fun about this at all. She pressed her lips together as they approached. Smoke poured from the back half of the building, where firefighters were working on some last remaining flames. The front half of the building was nothing but rubble, and more emergency personnel were digging through the bricks as quickly as they could. There were also dozens of volunteers, men and women Rebekah recognized as being shopkeepers or businessmen or Avon ladies working alongside the response team, not caring about their clothing or their nice shoes as they loaded up wheelbarrows with bricks and carted them away to make room for more searching. She found Jeremy. "Dr. Hunsaker sent me out here to do triage," she said. "I need all the injured to come to me before they're driven off." "Can you see to that?" "I'll do my best," he replied. "I can't guarantee there won't be questions asked." "We're hoping there will be fewer out here in the chaos," she replied. "To be honest, though, if I am found out, that doesn't matter as much as getting these people the help they need." He gave her a nod. "Here comes one now." A woman who looked like she might be one of the housekeepers was brought over on a stretcher. "Concussion, blow to the right side of her head. She'll be fine with rest, but she needs fluids." Jeremy jotted that down on a piece of paper he ripped from a notebook in his pocket. "Here," he said, handing it to the ambulance driver. "We're speeding things up, give this to the ER staff." The driver nodded, and off they went. Rebekah moved from person to person as they were brought from the rubble. A few times, the paramedics loaded up a patient before Rebekah had seen them, but Jeremy was keeping an eye on things, and he made sure she got a chance to examine them before they drove away. She was amazed at this side of him. He seemed to know what was going on every single minute, even with so many responders and volunteers. "Rebekah, this is Miss Jones," Jeremy said, bringing a middle-aged woman up to meet her. Miss Jones had a cloth pressed to her forehead, and she looked dazed. "She's the director of the facility." "Yes, we've met," Rebekah said. "I do wellness checks out here from time to time." "Miss Jones, how are you feeling?" "I don't know what happened," the woman replied. "We were just starting to get dinner put out, and then there was this horrible noise." Rebekah put her arm around Miss Jones' shoulders. "Shock, scrapes and bruises," she said to Jeremy. "She doesn't need to go in, but she'll want to see her doctor tomorrow." "Miss Jones, how many people were in the building at the time?" "Do you know?" 112 residents, and 16 staff, Miss Jones replied automatically. "But I don't know how many visitors." "We have a sign-in book, but I can't find it." She looked over her shoulder at the devastation. "That's all right, Miss Jones. We're going to do everything we can to find them all." A volunteer led Miss Jones over to the side of the property, where some folding chairs had been found and set up. Mugs of coffee and hot chocolate were being passed around, and Rebekah was thankful once again for this community that rallied around in times of crisis. She didn't think she'd see caring like this anywhere else. Or she might be a little biased, because this was her hometown. Either way, she was proud of it. One man was brought out and sent straight to the morgue, nearly breaking Rebekah's heart. She knew it was silly to think they'd all survived. They were already in poor health, or they wouldn't be in the center, and adding this kind of explosion on top of that. It was a miracle how many had survived. She tried not to think about the statistics as she continued working. Even one death was one too many. As the sun set, many of the volunteers ran home to get their cars, then parked them with their headlights shining on the wreckage. Even when it grew to be fully dark, no one wanted to give up. Partial light was better than no light at all, and they would not make any remaining survivors wait for their rescue. "Are you all right?" Jeremy asked, coming up and pressing some hot chocolate into Rebekah's hands. "I'm fine. It just takes a lot out of me." She glanced around. "How many dead now?" 10. She nodded. "Awful, just awful." He touched her arm. "You're doing a ton of good out here, Rebekah. You're helping us get these people treated much faster than we could relying on our regular equipment. Focus on the lives we're saving, not the ones we've lost." "I keep telling myself that. I promise, I will." He moved on to help excavate the next pile of rubble. It seemed they were never ending. As soon as they cleared one spot, it was time to clear another. "This woman will need emergency surgery for a shattered pelvis. That man needs to have his arm set and put in a cast, but no surgery. Immobilize with a split for now. This one," Rebekah closed her eyes. "She's gone." Finally, around 2 o'clock in the morning, the responders had removed as much rubble as they could, and those who had been tracking the victims said they'd counted the proper number of residents and staff. "But we still don't know about visitors," Rebekah mumbled when Jeremy told her it was time to go home. He put his hands on her shoulders. "It's okay. Listen, the visitors would have been there to see residents, right? And so we would have found them with the residents they were there to see." Rebekah slowly nodded. That made sense. She was just so tired. "I'm taking you home," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders and guiding her away from the spot where she'd been working for hours. "Actually, no, I don't think I am. You need to be with someone who understands all this. I don't want to leave you alone." "Where should I take you?" "Tracy's," Rebekah said. She wanted to be alone, but she understood the wisdom of what Jeremy was saying. She'd worn herself out both physically and emotionally using her gift over and over again, and she had no way of knowing how long it would take her to recover. She'd never pushed herself like this before. "Tell me where to go." Before she could open her mouth to heckle him, he grinned. "Let me rephrase. Tell me how to get there." "Party pooper." She rested her head against the window as he pulled the ambulance out onto the road. The siren stayed quiet this time, which was a relief. It had been nothing but sirens all day. When they pulled up in front of Tracy's house, Jeremy came around and helped her down. "Call me in the morning, okay?" "I will. Thanks for the ride. Thank you for everything you just did. That was incredible." The front door opened, and Tracy stepped out onto the porch. "I've got hot chocolate on the stove," she called out. "Would you like some, Jeremy?" "Thanks, but another time," he replied. "I've got to turn in the rig and then hit the hay." "I bet you're exhausted. I'll give you a rain check, all right?" "You're welcome here anytime." "Thanks, Tracy." He gave her a wave, then turned back to Rebekah. "Take care of yourself, you hear?" "Yeah. You too." Rebekah dragged herself up the porch steps and into her sister's house, where she was surprised to see all her sisters waiting for her. "And Heather wants you to call her as soon as you get here," Candace said. Rebekah flopped onto the couch. "What's the matter? Why are you all here?" "We're here for you, silly," Marty said. "Aren't you at college?" Rebekah waggled a finger at her youngest sister. "No, because I'm here. Thanks for getting me out of class, by the way, that was awesome. Most boring lecture of my life, can I say? I'm confused." "Poor girl. Explain it to her, Jessica said. Well, I was sitting in this lecture, which was really boring, as I just said, and I saw the explosion. I recognized the building, and I ran out of there as fast as I could and tried to find a payphone to warn them, but it was too late. I had the precog just a couple of minutes before it actually happened. But then I felt like I needed to come home and be here for you. That's really sweet, Marty, Rebekah said. I'm not sure why you had that feeling, but I'm glad you're here. Sometimes we don't need concrete reasons, Galen said. Sometimes we just want to be surrounded by our people. Here. Candace put a mug of hot chocolate in Rebekah's hands. And there's lasagna in the oven, you need something hot and cheesy to eat. At 2 o'clock in the morning? Rebekah protested. Doesn't matter what time it is, Candace replied. You're worn out, you've got to recharge. Jessica handed her the phone. And here's Heather. Rebekah shook her head. She thought they were all taking this way too seriously, but it was touching in a weird smothering sort of way. Hey, Heather. You got roped into this too, huh? Is that an Idaho rancher joke? Roping? Heather chuckled. How are you doing, little sister? Exhausted. I've never been so tired in all my life, but these weirdos keep talking to me and putting cocoa in my hands and threatening to feed me. It's getting on my nerves. Heather laughed. Sounds like family to me. I sure miss you. We miss you too. Why'd you have to move away? Because the love of my life lives here. Just wait until you, she paused, then gasped. You've met someone, haven't you? How did you know that? I thought you had to see people in person before you could read their hues. This is the first time it's ever happened over the phone. Oh, Rebekah, you're going to be so happy. You're yellow, and he's orange, but when you come together, you're peach, like you're softer together. It's beautiful. If I'd known you could do that over the phone, I would have called you before now. Well, like I said, this is the first time. It might not happen ever again, you just might be special. I'm always special. Dad says I'm his favorite. He says that to all of us. I know. But he's lying to the rest of you. If it makes you feel better to think that, Rebekah could hear the smile in Heather's voice. Night, sis. Get some rest, all right? And let me know how you feel tomorrow. None of us have tested our powers like you have tonight, and it's kind of freaking us out because we don't know what effect it's going to have on you. Oh, so that's the real reason they're all sitting here staring at me like they're expecting me to turn into some kind of creature. I'm sure there are multiple reasons. Love you. Love you too. Night. Rebekah handed the phone back to Jessica, who almost got the cord tangled in Galen's hair as she carried it over to the receiver. Watch it, Galen said good-naturedly. So, you knew I'd be coming here? Rebekah asked Marty, and she nodded. And we all thought it sounded like a great excuse for a slumber party. Jessica sat down next to Rebekah and rubbed her shoulder. We haven't spent enough time together lately. Yeah, that's because you fell in love, you stinker. Rebekah nudged Jessica in return. Candace carried in a plate of lasagna and commanded Rebekah to eat it while Tracy got her spare bed made up. We'll all be here in the morning, Galen said as Rebekah ate her last bite. And if you need anything, just let us know. You're all crazy, but thank you, Rebekah replied. She went into the spare room, stripped off her clothes, and climbed into the pajamas Tracy had laid out for her. Then she climbed into the bed, lay down, and stared at the ceiling. She'd thought she'd go right to sleep, but no such luck. She kept seeing the long line of people being brought to her for evaluation, the grim expressions on the faces of the rescuers, the overwhelmed looks on the faces of the volunteers. She'd saved dozens of people, she knew that for a fact. But she couldn't help but ache for those she couldn't save, for those who were already dead when she got there. About an hour had passed when she heard a soft knock, and Jessica and Galen came in the room. "Hey," Jessica said. "Why aren't you asleep?" "I'm thinking too much." She smiled. "You've always thought too much, kind of like me. I just dreamed about you, Bex, and you've got to get some perspective on this thing. That's why you brought the mental health counselor with you?" Rebekah asked, nodding at Galen. "I'm very useful to have around," Galen replied. "Now, what's going on here? Why are you making Jessica have bad dreams about you?" Rebekah sat up so she could see her sisters better, scooting back and leaning against the headboard. "So, we have these gifts," she began. "And we've been using them for good things, and we all feel that's why we were given them. I've saved probably 150 lives since I started using my gift at the hospital, but there are so many others I haven't been able to save. So many things that have been out of my control." "And you don't like being out of control," Galen said. "You've never liked it, not since you were a little girl." "I just like it when people do things my way," Rebekah defended. "It's a good way. It's a logical way. I can save people lots of unnecessary work if they just do it like I tell them." Jessica and Galen exchanged glances. "I like being in control too, but I have to tell you, that's sometimes even more crazy-making than being out of control," Jessica said. "Rebekah, here's the thing," Galen said. "You can't save the world. You aren't that powerful. Yes, you have a gift, but it doesn't extend to everyone and everything, and that's exactly how it should be. If you really could control life and death, that would be overwhelming. The pressure would crush you. You can't make those kinds of decisions, no one can. That's why we aren't in charge of it. You need to concentrate on the few people you have been given the ability to help, and accept that you can't save everyone." "Have you saved everyone you've ever helped?" Jessica asked. Rebekah shook her head. "About 6 months ago, a man came into the ER with a brain bleed, and he stroked out on the table. Your gift gave him his best possible chance, but you're still not responsible for who lives and who dies," Galen said. "Only God can do that." Rebekah nodded, finally feeling the weight that had been crushing her chest begin to lift. "Thank you. I knew that, but it just wasn't sinking in through all the layers." "You'll feel a ton better in the morning," Galen said. "You've got to get some sleep. Lying awake and festering about things is only going to make them worse." After her sisters left the room, Rebekah thought about everything they'd said. She was so grateful that life and death weren't up to her. She'd be terrible at it. No one would ever die, which would completely throw off the balance of the ecosystem, and she'd end up getting fired from the task anyway. "I'm a helper," she whispered to herself. "I'm not in charge." With that, she was finally able to go to sleep. Chapter 8. When Rebekah woke up the next morning, it took a second for her to realize where she was. She could hear her sisters' voices in the other room, and that made her smile as she threw back her blankets and walked out to join them. "Did you get enough sleep?" Candace asked, turning from the stove with a spatula in her hand. "I'm making eggs and pancakes, hope that's okay." "That's more than okay." Rebekah looked around at all the blankets draped on the couches and the floor. "Where did you all fit, anyway? This place isn't exactly huge." "We made it work. I'm never sharing a bed with Marty again, though. I forgot how much she kicks." Tracy made a show of rubbing her shins. "I don't kick. I assert my presence," Marty retorted. "How are you feeling?" Galen asked, looking at Rebekah with concern. "Do you have any residual side effects from last night?" "I'm still really tired, but it's a normal tired now," Rebekah replied. "Last night, I was tired down to my soul." "Eat some pancakes. Your soul will feel better." Candace set a plate in front of Rebekah, who didn't argue. Did you put mini marshmallows in my pancakes?" Rebekah asked, poking at them with her fork. Yes, I did. Everyone needs mini marshmallows in their lives from time to time. Candace grinned, then turned back to her task. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Tracy stood up to peer through the curtains. It's a man, she whispered dramatically. Is everyone decent? No, but I'm dressed, Galen replied, and they all laughed. Rebekah was still in the pajamas she'd borrowed from Tracy, but they were flannel, and she didn't think she was too scandalous. Tracy opened the door. Morning, Jeremy, she said. Come in, have some breakfast with us. Rebekah's hand immediately went to her hair. When Tracy said it was a man, she was expecting the UPS driver or the mailman or something. She wasn't expecting to see Jeremy, not when she hadn't showered and her hair was sticking up everywhere. Morning, everyone, Jeremy said as he came inside. Looks like you had fun last night. I don't know if I'd call it fun, Jessica replied. There was snoring and blanket stealing and kicking. Sounds like fun to me. Jeremy crossed the floor and gave Rebekah a quick hug. How are you? I'm all right. I'm more worried about you than I am about me. You did all the heavy lifting last night. He shrugged. Goes with the territory. Hey, are those mini marshmallows in your pancakes? He'd barely said the words before Candace slid a plate in front of him as well. Now that's what I call service. They ate side by side, a pretty normal morning thing to do, but Rebekah was still uptight. She should have hopped in the shower as soon as she woke up. He was all shaved and looking nice, and she looked like she'd just woken up in borrowed pajamas. He seemed to read her thoughts, because when they were done eating, he said, Would you like me to drive you home so you can change? Or should we go to the hospital and pick up your car first? Or you might want one of your sisters to take you. I should have asked that. Sorry. There's no way I'm showing up at the hospital like this even if it's just to get my car, so yes, going home is great, Rebekah replied. And I think all my sisters need to get to work, am I right? They each nodded. I've already missed one class today, Marty said. I'm going to tell them it was a family emergency, though. They can't get too mad at me about that. Rebekah smiled and shook her head. Marty never did let things like missing a class bother her too much. So, to answer your question, yes, Jeremy. I'd appreciate a ride home, and then a ride to the hospital. Do you work today? He shook his head. We're on a skeleton crew today to rest up from everything that happened yesterday. I'm on call if anything big happens, but other than that, I'm yours. What do you think, Marty? Rebekah asked. Is anything big going to happen today? You know that's not how it works, Marty protested. I don't get to pick and choose like that. Jeremy watched the exchange with a smile on his face. Remind me which one she is, he said in a low voice. She's the precog, Rebekah replied. She'd rattled off all the sisters and their gifts when she told him about herself, but there was no way he could remember them all that easily. 7 sisters and 7 powers, that was a lot to track. That's right. I'll get it eventually. Rebekah hugged her sisters goodbye and thanked them for rallying to her cause, then tied Tracy's robe a little tighter around her waist and walked out to Jeremy's car with him, her dirty clothes in a plastic sack. You're the best for doing this for me, she said as they drove away from Tracy's. I debated about coming because I didn't want to interrupt your time with your sisters, but I wanted to be sure you were all right, he explained. I would have left if you wanted me to, I know you're tight with your family. That was so sweet. Her mind flashed back to the conversation she'd had with her dad about all the things a guy would do if he really cared about a girl, and Jeremy seemed to be hitting them all right down the line. Especially one. We've never kissed, she said aloud. He glanced at her. Well, no, we haven't, he replied. She felt ridiculous that she'd blurted that out. I'm sorry, that was really lame of me, she said. It's just, my dad says I'll know if you really like me, if you want to spend time with me, even if we aren't making out, and it just occurred to me that we haven't made out at all. We haven't even kissed. And yet I still like spending time with you, Jeremy said with a grin. That must mean I really like you. Yeah, I think it does, she replied. But that doesn't mean we can't ever kiss. It just means that we haven't yet. So, there's hope for this to occur at some point in the future? There's hope, but not in the immediate future. I haven't brushed my teeth since I left for work yesterday, and there's no way I'm kissing anyone until that's been resolved. I appreciate your diligence and devotion to proper dental hygiene, Jeremy replied. You are a credit to nurses everywhere. And to those who kiss. And to kissing nurses? Absolutely. He looked over at her and grinned again, and her heart gave that little thump. Suddenly, kissing him was about all she could think about. She invited him to sit and choose a TV show, then she raced down the hall and into her bedroom. Shower, brushing her teeth, putting on something cute. She'd never been so nervous about choosing an outfit before, or about how well she brushed her teeth. Now that they'd discussed dental hygiene, it seemed more important than it ever had before. When she finally came back into the living room, she felt much more herself, and Jeremy gave a low whistle when he saw her. You clean up great. You aren't so bad yourself. He used the remote to flip off the TV, then crossed the room and took both of her hands in his. I'm assuming that you brushed your teeth, he said, his voice low. Never before had a question about toothbrushes made a tingle race down her spine. I brushed, and I flossed, and I used mouthwash, she replied, not able to look away from his gaze. His eyes held her in place like she'd been rooted to the spot. Mouthwash too? You're taking this very seriously. I wouldn't joke about something like mouthwash. He smiled, a long, slow smile. I see. And I agree that it's important to know when to joke and when not to joke. The chemistry between them was building by the second, and Rebekah could almost feel it crackling in the air. She took the tiniest step toward him, studying his eyes, and he let go of her hand. He cupped her cheek, then tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Do you remember me telling you how incredible you are? I seem to recall that conversation. Her cheek was still tingling from his touch. Well, it was true. Every word of it. I'm falling in love with you, Rebekah, and I didn't want to kiss you until you knew that. Maybe it's my turn to make sure you know what you're getting into. I'm not the kiss and run type, and if I'm kissing you, that means I'm all in. She glanced down at his lips, then back up to his eyes. I like the sound of that, she said, her voice barely coming out above a whisper. I was sure hoping you'd say that. He slid his arms around her waist and brought her in close, then kissed her, just like she'd been dreaming about for the last hour. He slid one hand up her back and threaded his fingers through her hair, cradling her neck, and she had the fleeting thought that it was so thoughtful of him to support her cervical vertebrae while they kissed. He really was a very nice man. He let go and stepped back, taking her hand again. Shall we go get your car? My car? She blinked. What car? Do I have a car? He threw his head back and laughed. Yes, you have a car, and it's at the hospital. Oh, that car. You'll have to forgive me. You see, I was just kissed, and it seems that just about every other thought got wiped clean out of my head. That sounds like a rather serious problem. It's a good thing we're on our way to a hospital. Jeremy held her hand as he drove, except for those times when he actually needed to use his hand for something driving related, because driving is generally considered to be a two-handed pursuit. When he pulled into the hospital parking lot, he said, Do you know your next shift? She shook her head. I thought I had today off, but I want to go in and make sure. They might be so swamped in there, I could be needed. She knew she'd recommended several people for surgery, and she had no idea how that had all come about. She wished she'd checked in at the hospital before going to Tracy's, but in reality, she would have been worthless. She'd given everything she had. Let's go find out. They walked into the emergency room together, and Rebekah looked around for Dr. Hunsaker. She found him at the nurse's station, filling out a chart. "Nurse McClain," he greeted her. "I didn't expect to see you today. I wasn't sure if I was needed, so I thought I'd better check." "I'm glad you did, but not for the reasons you think." He held out his arm and motioned for her to join him in one of the empty cubicles. "You did an amazing job yesterday," he said, lowering his voice. "When those patients came in already diagnosed, we were able to treat them immediately, and I'm convinced lives were saved. You did this community a tremendous service, and I only wish we could thank you publicly." She shook her head. "Even if you were vague about my contribution, I wouldn't want that kind of recognition. I just want to do my job." "I know that, and I appreciate it. That's what makes the next thing I'm going to say even harder." He looked her in the eye. "I'm prepared to offer you a job here at the hospital as head of nursing. You'd oversee every nurse in this building, from the ER to the surgical floors, and your salary would increase by 30%. What this means, though, is that you'd have to withdraw your application for medical school." I don't know what to say. Head of nursing? She'd had the thought once or twice that she'd like that job, but it had seemed completely out of reach. Now it was being offered to her, but at a cost she hadn't anticipated. "I'm honored, I really am. I just wonder if I could have some time to think about it." "Yes, of course. And I realize I'm being selfish in wanting to keep your skills close to home, but I've never claimed to be unselfish. I want you on my team, Nurse McClain. Please think it over carefully." "I will. I promise." "Good. Now, take the rest of the day off, if you please. I'm told you almost looked like a patient yourself by the time you went home last night." "I was pretty tired." "I'm sure that's an understatement. We'll see you tomorrow for the afternoon shift, and not a moment sooner." Rebekah left the cubicle and went to find Jeremy, who was at the nurse's station, chatting with Harriet. "I have the rest of the day off, and I don't come in until tomorrow afternoon," she told him. "Perfect. I see lots of good things in your future, things like a good lunch and then a nap." "A nap? That's kind of a weird thing to do on a date, isn't it?" He smiled. "The lunch part is a date, but then you're going home for a nap. I'm not a nurse, but I'm a paramedic, and I know exhaustion when I see it." She was about to argue with him and tell him she was fine, but that wasn't the truth. She'd gotten a few hours of sleep the night before, but not nearly as much as she needed. "All right," she replied. "Lunch and then a nap. And after that? If you're up to it, what would you think about a drive out to San Antonio to meet my family?" "I'd love it," she replied without hesitation. "But only if you're up to it," he repeated. "I'm pretty sure I will be, but I promise I'll let you know if I change my mind." He put his arm around her shoulders and walked her to her car. "Sounds like a deal. Here's your chariot, milady, and I'll meet you at Comida in a few minutes. That is, if Mexican sounds good. I'm a McClain from Texas, sir. I believe we've had this conversation before." He grinned. "I'll see you there." Chapter 9. Climbing into bed for an afternoon nap with a nice full cheesy stomach was one of the nicest things Rebekah had ever done. She fell asleep almost immediately, and when she woke up, she felt as though she'd actually gotten some good restorative rest. She picked up the phone and called Jeremy, just like he'd asked her to do, and they agreed that they'd leave for San Antonio in an hour. Rebekah called Tracy and asked her to pass the word along to all the sisters that she was doing all right, and then she stood in front of her closet and tried to figure out what to wear. She'd only been taken home to meet the parents one other time, and that was the year after nursing school when she thought she'd been madly in love. His parents had turned their noses up at her because she was from a tiny little town called Bagley, and nothing good could ever come from a place like that. She refrained from telling them that she was part of the richest family in the whole region. If they didn't like her on her own terms, she didn't like them either. Within a week, she and her boyfriend had broken up, and she'd never regretted the decision, even though it stung. This was different, though. She wasn't fresh out of school, she was older now, and more experienced. And Jeremy wasn't like any other guy she'd ever met. He knew something potentially frightening about her, and yet he'd shown her nothing but kindness and respect. In fact, he admired what she did, but he wasn't intimidated by it, and that gave her even more reason to like him. Well, to love him. She grinned at the thought. She finally settled on a denim skirt and a white ruffled blouse. It was a little dressy while also being a little casual, and she hoped his mother would like it. She knew that mothers judged their sons' girlfriends by the way they dressed and if they showed enough respect for the event they were attending. "Should I bring anything?" she asked Jeremy when he picked her up. "A cake? A bottle of wine? Help me out here, I want to impress your parents." He laughed. "They'll be impressed by you, not by anything you bring. And I haven't told them about your gift. I didn't want to get their hopes up. You don't know for sure if you can help Greg, and I thought it would be better this way." "Thank you, I meant to ask you about that, but forgot. I'd much prefer it if they never knew. There's a lot of pressure that's involved with the whole thing, and I'd like to bring as few people as possible into the inner circle." Agreed. As they drove towards San Antonio, Rebekah said, "I'm not sure if this is the best time for us to have this conversation, but I need to tell you a couple of things. You have a captive audience right now, so you might as well go for it." "True. Do you remember my telling you that I was thinking about going to medical school?" "Sure do. That was the day we met, and I'm never going to forget that day because it was so incredible. You were so incredible." It would be easy to let herself get distracted by the way he was looking at her, but she pushed that aside. "What I didn't tell you was that I've already put in my application. I find out in September if I've been accepted." "What? You've already applied? That's great. What school?" "UT San Antonio." "That's quite a coincidence. We're going to San Antonio right now." He gave her an exaggeratedly comical face, and she shook her head with a smile. "They've got a great program, and they're close enough to home that I can bring my laundry for my mother to do, just like she does for Marty," Rebekah said, not meaning a word of it. "I'm really hoping I get in, but there's a fly in the ointment." "Well, that's disgusting. Get it out." "I'd love to, but I'm not sure how. Dr. Hunsaker talked to me earlier about accepting a position as head nurse instead of going to medical school." "Really? Wow." Jeremy shook his head. "Do you have any idea what you want to do?" "I don't. On one hand, being the head nurse is an incredible opportunity, something I think every nurse dreams about at least once or twice in her life. Dr. Hunsaker respects my opinion, and I think I'd be able to do a lot of good. On the other hand, though, becoming a doctor, that would be amazing." "Is Dr. Hunsaker going to wait to see if you get accepted, or do you have to give him your answer sooner than that?" Jeremy asked. "Sooner. Lots sooner. And that makes it all the harder to know what to choose. With Dr. Hunsaker, I'm promised a job. With medical school, I have no promises whatsoever. I know I wrote a good essay for my application, and I know that my references are spot on and that I passed all the preliminary stuff, but if the other applicants did a better job, there's no medical school for me. I like having security, but I also want to brave something new. You really have no idea how confused I've been." "And there's another element to add to this decision," Jeremy said. "Where will you live, and with who?" I thought I'd figure that out when I reached that point, she replied. In most circumstances, that's what you should do, get the job before you rent the condo next door and that sort of thing. But in this case, a few decisions have to be made ahead of time. He looked over at her. Where do I fit into your plans? To be honest, 2 weeks ago, I didn't even know you existed, she replied. I had every intention of moving to the dorms and concentrating completely on school. But then you showed up, and you knocked everything on its ear. That's what I do, Jeremy said cheerfully. I'm an ear knocker. I noticed. She squeezed his hand. He didn't say anything else until he'd taken the first exit into San Antonio and drove the car through the streets until they reached a pretty little neighborhood park. He got out, then came around and opened the door for her. Come here, he said, motioning toward the swings. Let's have a little fun in the middle of this very tense conversation. Is it tense? I didn't realize it was tense. Yes, it's tense, but it's understandable. We're dealing with lifestyles and goals and dreams. Those things are always bound to be tense. At least we get to explore those options together. True. They each took a swing, and Rebekah pumped higher and higher until she felt like her feet were about to touch the sky. They never did, of course, but it was a lovely thing to think about and to pretend. You asked how you fit in my plans, she called out when they passed each other. And? What's your answer? My answer is that I plan to see you as often as you'll let me. We're not going to let something like this pull us apart. Jeremy hopped off his swing, and a moment later, she did as well. I want to marry you, he said. I've wanted to marry you almost from the first moment I saw you. You want to see me as often as I'll let you. Well, I want to wake up to you every morning and fall asleep to you at night. Is there room in your life for that? She reached her arms around his waist and stepped closer, laying her head on his shoulder. She could hear his heart beating against her ear. Yes, she replied. Does that mean no medical school? What? Why would it mean that? He tilted her chin up and looked into her eyes. Did you think I would make you choose between me and school? I wasn't sure, she replied. I just wasn't seeing a way to give us all what we wanted at the same time. Well, here's the thing, he said. If you decide you want to go to school, awesome, I'll marry you and you'll go to school. If you want to take the promotion in Bagley, fantastic, I'll marry you and you'll run the nursing staff. The key here is that we're married. I don't care where we live as long as I'm living with you. She couldn't help the tears that welled up in her eyes. You mean that? Absolutely. You're the woman I've always dreamed of finding, and now that you're standing here in front of me, I'm not going to risk losing you. Well, all right then. That makes my decision a little harder and a little easier at the same time. Now I just need to decide what I want instead of choosing for both of us. I'm with you all the way, babe. He looked up at the sky. I think we're about to get some rain. You ready to go? Yeah. Thanks for the swings. You're welcome. I thought they looked like fun. As they drew nearer to the Burton's house, Rebekah felt her nerves multiply. Not only was she still trying to decide what she wanted to do, but now she was about to meet her future in-laws, and see if she could give their son a better prognosis than the one he currently had. No pressure there. Something I should tell you before we get there, Jeremy said as he turned the corner and continued east. Things at my house are a little complicated. Greg's in a wheelchair, and my mom works herself overtime to take care of him. She feels guilty because of what happened. And my dad, well, he blames me. Why? What did happen? Jeremy didn't answer for a minute, and she wondered if he was going to. Then he spoke. It was Greg's senior year in college, and he and his friends were celebrating their last football win of the season. They didn't place in any championships, but they'd done all right for themselves, and they decided to go out to an all-night pizza place and hang out for a while. My dad asked me to drive by this place on my way home from work that night and make sure everything was on the up and up. Well, I was tired, I was working swing shift at a factory, and I forgot to stop by. He slowed the car and made a right-hand turn. Greg and his friends rolled out of there around 4 in the morning, and they got hit by a drunk driver. They all survived, but they suffered various injuries, Greg's the worst of all. My dad thinks that if I'd been there, it never would have happened, but how can we say that for sure? I mean, yes, maybe it wouldn't have happened, but it still could have all the same. Greg and his friends weren't drinking, so it's not like I could have influenced them in that. And how was I supposed to stop someone else from plowing into them? Rebekah's heart hurt for him. She could hear the anguish in his voice and wondered if he blamed himself too. So, in our own ways, we're all trying to make up for what happened, but in reality, there is no way to make up for it. It's the past, it's over and done, and we've got to find a way to move forward. If you're able to come up with a solution for Greg, that's fantastic, but I want you to know that I completely understand if there's nothing you can do. It's been a long time, he's been treated by several doctors, and my love for you isn't dependent on whether you can fix my brother. She reached over and squeezed his hand. Thank you for that. And thank you for letting me into your heart and your life. The more I get to know you, the more I realize just how lucky I am. Oh, by the way, Heather approves. She does? She's never met me. True, but she approves. So that obviously means this whole getting married thing is a go. He grinned. Well then, I approve of Heather, too. They pulled up in front of a modest white clapboard house, and Jeremy took Rebekah's hand as they climbed the stairs. A young man in a motorized wheelchair answered the door, and Jeremy introduced him as Greg. So, you must be the girl from the hospital, Greg said, reaching out to shake Rebekah's hand. My mom hasn't been able to stop talking about you, her curiosity's been eating her alive. I'm looking forward to meeting her too. Rebekah took the hand he offered, and she concentrated as the familiar warmth and vibration began, telling her where to look. Her attention was immediately pulled to his spinal cord, and she saw layers of scar tissue there. She also saw that his spinal cord had been severely damaged, but that his body had miraculously stitched itself back together, allowing him to have more movement than he would otherwise. She saw all this in a split second as she held his hand, and as he broke contact to move back and welcome them inside, her insight ended. Greg moved farther back into the house to let his parents know they were there, and Jeremy looked at Rebekah with a question on his face. I needed a little more time, she replied softly. I have a good idea of the extent of his spine injury, but I need to figure out what can be done about it. Do you need to touch him again? I'm afraid I do, but that's kind of weird. I mean, how many people want their brother's fiancés to sit there and hold their hand? Jeremy chuckled. Not a ton, but we'll think of something. Let's go meet my parents. Hannah Burton was everything Jeremy had said, warm and welcoming, and also wrapped up in a big ball of guilt. Thomas was also welcoming, yet reserved. The only member of the family who seemed to be completely at ease in the situation was Greg. Should we tell them? Jeremy whispered when his mother stepped away from the table to grab dessert. Rebekah had planned to tell her parents first, but she realized that wasn't exactly fair, and this family needed something positive to lift their spirits. Go ahead, she whispered back. When Hannah returned to the table, Jeremy said, So, Mom, with all this cake baking you do, have you ever made a wedding cake? Oh, once or twice. It's been several years, though. Do you think you could get into the groove again, or should we start shopping around for a baker? Her eyes flew open, and she looked from one to the other. You're getting married? Oh, Jeremy, that's wonderful. When? Where? That's still up in the air, Rebekah replied. He only asked me on the way here. Well, whenever it is, I couldn't be happier. Hannah grabbed a napkin from the table and wiped her eyes. I need a hug. Jeremy and Rebekah both came around the table and hugged her, and Thomas shook Rebekah's hand. Rebekah saw her opportunity and turned to Greg. Are you a hugger? He held out his arms. Come here, new sister. She laughed and bent down to hug him. As she did, the rest of the knowledge she needed flooded into her mind, and she stood back up with a big smile on her face. She couldn't wait to talk to Jeremy, but that would have to wait. For now, she gave him a nod, hoping he'd understand what she meant to tell him. The rest of their evening was pleasant, but Rebekah could see what Jeremy meant about his relationship with his father. Thomas just didn't seem to interact with Jeremy the way he did with everyone else. She observed it as they batted around some wedding ideas, and she saw it again when she was telling the Burtons about her parents and encouraged them to come for a visit so they could all get to know each other. Finally, she decided to talk to Hannah about it. She could continue to wonder about it and worry about Jeremy, or she could see what she could do to bring it out in the open. She offered to help Hannah clean up the kitchen, and while the sink was filling with water, she said, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I noticed that Thomas and Jeremy seem a little distant with each other. Hannah sighed and leaned against the counter. The last few years have been difficult, she said. All the men in this family are headstrong and independent, and they take things personally as well. She blinked rapidly. When Greg had his accident, Thomas blamed himself, and he's never moved past it. Thomas blames himself? But Jeremy thinks he blames him, Rebekah said, confused. Hannah began clearing the dishes off the table as she spoke. Thomas was supposed to get the brakes on Greg's car checked that day while Greg was finishing up exams, but he got busy at work and it didn't happen. When the drunk driver hit Greg's car, it was from the side, and having better brakes wouldn't have done much to help, but Thomas still held on to that guilt. It's affected everything in his life, including his relationships. So it has nothing to do with Jeremy at all, then? No, it doesn't. He's changed with all of us. I wish I'd known Jeremy thought it was him. He didn't need to carry that around with him all this time. Rebekah smiled. It's not too late to mend things. I don't know if Thomas wants to have a touchy-feely conversation. That was never his thing, even before the accident. It might be the very thing he needs the most, Rebekah said gently. She couldn't march in here and start dictating how this family communicated, that wasn't her place. But she could encourage them. Hannah nodded. I'll see what I can do. Maybe enough time has gone by that he'll be ready to talk about it now. They finished up the kitchen, then said their goodbyes. Rebekah told Hannah that she'd have her mother call as soon as they told the McClains the good news. She had a feeling that Barbara's friendship would go a long way toward helping Hannah find the balance she needed. It was all Rebekah could do to leave it at that, but as soon as they were in the car with the door closed, she turned to Jeremy. There's a way to help Greg. There is? Yes. His body formed scar tissue around the site of his injury, and that tissue helped protect his spinal cord. It's also compressing the cord, so it's hurting it while it's helping it. If a skilled surgeon were to go in there and remove 50% of that scar tissue, taking out the bits that are causing the pressure but leaving the bits that are protecting the cord, it would reduce Greg's pain, and it might give him back the ability to walk. She held up a hand. I'm not making any promises. I have no way of knowing for sure what the outcome will be. I just saw the possibilities, and I also saw potential risks. It could paralyze him completely. Did you see any possibilities of death? She shook her head. No, but remember, I don't know everything. Greg will need to have a consult with the surgeon to find out all the ins and outs. What I'll do is talk to Dr. Hunsaker tomorrow, and I'll ask him to recommend a surgeon. He's skilled, but I think we need a specialist. Once we have a name, you can tell your parents that I got curious and asked you some questions, and that I recommended this particular doctor. How do we know the spine surgeon will be willing to listen to the idea? We don't, but I'm going to get Dr. Hunsaker on my side, and that will increase our odds. I really don't know how to thank you, Jeremy said. All this time, we thought things would never get any better for Greg, and now there's this chance. It's just a chance, she replied. Nothing definite. I'll take whatever I can get, he said. You're a blessing in my life, no matter how this plays out. Never forget that. Chapter 10. If Jeremy had found the McClains a little overwhelming at Sunday dinner, that was nothing to the way they reacted when Rebekah announced their engagement. All of a sudden, there were a million different voices asking questions, and Rebekah laughed as she held up her hands to quiet them all. Hold on, she said. One thing at a time. First off, we won't be getting married until later this fall. There are several things we need to get squared away first, including finding out if I've gotten into medical school. Dr. Hunsaker offered me a cushy job at the hospital, but I was up all night thinking about it, and I'm still convinced that I can do more good as a doctor than I can as a nurse, so I'm going for it. If I don't get in, I'll try again, or I'll try a different school. I'm not going to give up. Hooray for not giving up, Marty said, and everyone laughed. Second, we have no idea where we'll live after the wedding. That's all going to depend on school. If I get into UT San Antonio, we'll move there, and Jeremy will be able to help out his family more. If I get in somewhere else, we'll move there. This amazing man has offered to follow me anywhere I go, so I'm feeling pretty blessed right now. Jeremy smiled. I'm just trying to give back everything you've given me. Ah, that's so sweet, Candace said. Looks like I'm getting another sappy romantic brother-in-law. And you love it, Kent replied, putting his arm around Jessica. Look, I'm going to kiss her. Ew, Candace said, and everyone laughed again. Welcome to the family, Bob said, shaking Jeremy's hand. I can tell how happy you make my daughter, and that means you're all right in my book. Thank you, sir, Jeremy replied. Your approval means a lot to me. There's just one thing I need to know, Bob continued. Do you play golf? On the computer, I mean. I have this game. My father wore you out, didn't he? Rebekah asked as she walked Jeremy out. Yeah, but it was fun. He leaned against the hood of his car and pulled Rebekah into his arms. Thank you for getting that referral from Dr. Hunsaker. I'm driving out to San Antonio tomorrow to talk to my parents about it. I'd invite you to come along, but they're such private people, I think it would be best if I talked to them about it on my own. I totally understand, and I was expecting that. Rebekah snuggled into his chest. While you're there, you might see about having a heart-to-heart with your dad. With my dad? What do you mean? He's not angry at you because of Greg's accident. He's been blaming himself this whole time. Jeremy had been rubbing her back, but his hand went still at her words before starting up again. I had no idea, he said softly. I asked your mother about it while we were there. I was being nosy, I admit it. Being nosy isn't always a bad thing. Especially if it can help resolve misunderstandings. I'm glad you feel that way and aren't angry with me. How can I be angry when you were trying to help me? What else did she say? She says she wishes she knew you felt that way. He exhaled. It's not the kind of thing I could just bring up to her. But now you're being given a chance to have those tough conversations and to open those closed doors. It's a new start, Jeremy. Thanks to you. She laughed. No, it would have come out in the open sooner or later without me. I just poked at it a little. He gathered her up tighter. You can downplay it all you want, but the reality is, you make good things happen wherever you go. I've always said you're special even without your gift, and this proves it. The gift is just the frosting on top of the really amazing cake? Yeah. That. He chuckled. I love you, Rebekah McClain. Did you know that? I strongly suspected it. Well, I hope all your suspicions are confirmed. He tilted his head down and kissed her. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us. I'm tempted to go in there and ask Marty to spill her guts. No, Rebekah replied. I like living this way, every day a surprise. Especially when we're together, it will be our own adventure, yours and mine. He kissed her again, then rested his chin on top of her head. I like the sound of that. Epilogue. This waiting is killing me, Hannah said, looking up at the clock for the millionth time. How long is this going to take? Dr. Cunningham is the best spine specialist in Texas, Rebekah replied. I'm sure he's just being thorough. And I wouldn't want him to be anything else. Hannah sank back into her chair in the waiting room. Thank you for helping us navigate through these rough waters, Rebekah. I didn't realize how wonderful it would be to have a nurse in the family. Anything I can do to help, Rebekah replied. It hadn't been easy for Jeremy to tell his parents about this surgery and the possibilities, knowing that he might be getting their hopes up for no reason, and it hadn't been easy for Greg to decide that he wanted to give it a try. It had been a long month of doctor visits and consultations, but now, here they were, and soon they'd know if it had been a success. Thomas and Jeremy entered the waiting room a moment later, carrying a pizza box, and Thomas was laughing about something Jeremy had said. So much healing had taken place in their family during this process, and it warmed Rebekah's heart every time she saw them interacting with each other positively. Another 30 minutes went by, and the pizza had been eaten and the box discarded before Dr. Cunningham came to find them. The procedure went exactly as planned, he said, looking pleased. We removed the scar tissue that was causing the pressure, but retained the tissue that was protecting the cord. There will be some recovery time, and you need to understand that this won't be an overnight process, but I believe that in time, Greg will be able to walk again now that the tissue isn't compressing the cord. Hannah immediately burst into tears, and Thomas gathered her up into his arms. Dr. Cunningham answered a few more questions, then stepped out of the room to leave the family alone. It's a miracle, Hannah kept saying over and over. It's such a miracle. Just remember what he said, Rebekah replied. There's going to be a long recovery process. Yes, but there's hope, and as long as there's hope, I can endure almost anything, Hannah replied. Rebekah held Jeremy's hand as they walked out into the hall to find a quiet corner. I can't thank you enough, Jeremy said once they were out of earshot of his parents. There's one very meaningful way you could thank me, she replied. You could marry me this fall. I could, huh? Yes. I think that would be a very nice token of your appreciation. He grinned and ran his hand down her arm. All right, then. I think I can handle that.